They told me not to cry, said tears would make me look weak, as if shame hadn't already wrapped itself around my bones. I stood barefoot on the wooden platform, wrists trembling, though no ropes bound them. The number above my head read 3,560, silver, but to me, it felt more like a price for parts than a person. I wasn't the first girl sold that day, and I wouldn't be the last. The crowd had that same sour mix of sweat, dust, and judgment that lingered long after you'd walked away. Men smoked and leaned against wooden beams, their eyes cutting through my dress like it was sheer. I stopped meeting their gazes long ago. It didn't help. I focused on a single nail poking up from the platform. Rusty, bent, imperfect, like me. Next up, strong hands, no known ailments, the auctioneer bellowed, lifting my arm like I was livestock. Young, obedient, and debt cleared. Let's start the bidding. The voices rose like a plague. 3,000! 32! 34.50! Then silence. One voice cut through, deep and steady. 3,560. The gavel struck once. Sold. I didn't lift my eyes to see who it was. I didn't care. They were all the same. Men with hard faces and harder hearts. I followed the boots in front of me, dust-covered, cracked leather, worn soles. He didn't speak, just tipped his hat toward the auction block, as if saying goodbye to something foul. We walked in silence through the crowd. No rope around my wrists. No hand yanking my arm. Just the heat, the dust, and his quiet footsteps ahead of mine. I didn't know his name, but something told me, and I couldn't say why, that this man hadn't bought me to own me. We rode in silence. The horse beneath me wasn't mine, but it didn't buck or resist me. Maybe it knew I wasn't much of a threat. I sat side saddle at first, stiff and proper like my mama had taught me, but the trail was long and my spine was tired of pretending. So I eventually turned and sat like he did, legs slung across, dignity traded for balance. The man hadn't said much since the auction. Just pointed toward his second horse and offered a nod. I climbed on without asking where we were going. I figured it didn't matter. The future wasn't something I'd owned for a long while. The trail wound out of town and into hills where the earth turned from red clay to yellow dust. The wind tugged at my hair like a child wanting attention. He rode ahead, not far, but enough to say he didn't need to watch me. Or maybe he trusted I wouldn't run. Where would I go anyway? When the sun began to dip, he finally spoke. "You hungry?" His voice was deeper than I'd expected, worn but not sharp, like an old violin that still played sweet. I nodded. He dismounted, tied the horses near a dry creek bed, and pulled out a tin of beans and some bread from his saddlebag. He didn't eat much, gave most of it to me without a word. I studied him as I chewed. Wide shoulders, weathered hands, a jaw that hadn't smiled in some time, if ever. He didn't look cruel, just tired, not old, maybe 35 at most, but the kind of tired that doesn't come from age. When night fell, he unrolled a blanket for me and set his own by the fire, 5 long paces away. I couldn't help it. I asked, "Ain't you worried I'll run?" He looked at me through the flames. "Not really." "Why not?" He shrugged. "Running means you got somewhere to go." I stared at him, heart pounding in my chest. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. We didn't talk after that. The fire popped and cracked. The stars stretched above us like God's lanterns. I laid on my side, facing away from him, pretending to sleep long before it came to me. And that was the first night I realized. He hadn't just bought me, he'd spared me. By the 3rd day, I learned his name. "Name's Corbin McGraw," he said while pouring coffee into a dented tin cup. "Folks back in Dry Creek used to call me Red on account of my hair. Don't anymore." I nodded slowly, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Clara," I said. though I'm sure he'd already heard it shouted from the auction block. Clara. Hensley! He tipped his hat. Pleased. And just like that, we didn't speak again for a while. He wasn't the talking kind, but I was beginning to see that silence with him didn't feel like judgment. It was just peace, worn like a comfortable coat. The trail ended at a small clearing tucked between two hills, where a modest log cabin leaned against the forest, like it was tired of standing on its own. A rusted horseshoe hung over the door, crooked and lucky only in spirit. Smoke curled from a stovepipe that must have been patched a dozen times. "This is it," he said. "Ain't much, but it's warm, and it's honest." I stepped inside, not sure what I expected. A locked room, chains. Instead, I found worn rugs, a tidy table, a cot near the hearth, and shelves lined with books. Real ones, not just Bibles. And seed catalogs, titles I hadn't seen since my mother's lap. "You like to read?" I asked, surprised. He shrugged, pulling off his hat. "Helps with the quiet." That night, he made stew. Didn't ask me to cook, clean, or serve, just handed me a bowl like I was a guest, not whatever I was supposed to be. "You expect something from me?" I finally asked, staring into my food. He didn't flinch. "No." I set my spoon down. "You bought me." "I settled your father's debt. Didn't buy you." I looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes weren't hard like the others. They carried something else. Grief, maybe. Regret. Or the kind of ache that only shows up after you've buried something deep and let it grow roots. "But why?" I whispered. He stirred his bowl. "Because I know what it's like to be trapped in something you didn't choose." I didn't ask more. I didn't need to. That cabin, rough as it was, started feeling more like a refuge than a prison. He gave me the smaller bed, let me open the windows when it got too stuffy, showed me how to mend fence boards and saddle. A horse, like it mattered, I knew. Each day, I waited for the moment he'd change. When the mask would drop and the real man, the buyer, the owner, would reveal himself. But it never came. Instead, he built me a garden box and asked what I'd like to grow. "Carrots," I said. "My mother used to make carrot pie." He nodded. "Then carrots it is." I didn't fall in love with him then. That's not how it works. Not with someone like me. But that was the day the dirt stopped feeling like a grave and started feeling like home. It was near the end of the second week when Corbin said he had to ride into town. "You don't have to come," he said, loading oats into his saddlebag. "But you can if you'd rather not be alone." I didn't answer right away. It had been months, maybe a full year, since I last stood in a town square without someone whispering behind my back. The last time I did, my father owed a gambling debt, and my mother had just been buried behind the chapel. "I'll come," I said finally, though I wasn't sure why. Dry Creek was a quiet town, but like all quiet places, the people there talked more than they listened. As soon as we turned onto the main street, I felt it. The pause in conversations, the way curtains shifted just enough for watching eyes, the slow turning of heads. We passed the general store first. An old man outside spat tobacco and didn't bother to hide his stare. At the blacksmith's, a teenage boy nudged his friend and nodded toward me, whispering something that made the other snort. I kept my chin up, but every step felt like I was dragging my past behind me on a chain. "She's the one from the block," I heard someone murmur. "I heard McGraw bought her out of pity," another voice said. Or worse, maybe not just pity. Corbin didn't say a word. He just kept walking beside me, steady and silent, like the murmurs were flies he didn't care to swat. He didn't touch me, didn't shield me, didn't pull me close like a possession. But he was near enough to let the whole town know I wasn't walking alone. We reached the sheriff's office, and Corbin went inside while I sat on a bench out front, pretending to study the dusty street. A woman stepped out of the seamstress shop across the way, her bonnet tight, her mouth tighter. She gave me a once-over like I was dirt on a church pew. "You his?" I blinked. "No, ma'am." She muttered, walking off like she didn't believe me, or worse, didn't care. When Corbin came out, I must have looked pale because he paused and offered me a sip from his canteen. I shook my head. I didn't want water. I wanted dignity. Back at the cabin, I said, "They think you brought me here for what other men would have." "I know," he said simply. "You don't care." "I care what's true. I don't much worry what ain't." I studied him then, more than I ever had. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He wasn't defending me to make himself look righteous. He just lived like truth didn't need to wear a badge. That night, I sat outside under the stars, not crying, but something close to it. Not because they were wrong about me, but because they were wrong about him. And I'd spent so long believing no man like him existed that I almost didn't recognize decency when I saw it. The storm came without warning. One moment, the hills were dry and humming with cicadas. The next, the sky turned dark as coal, and the wind howled like something ancient had been stirred from sleep. I was gathering kindling near the barn when the first crack of thunder split the air. Corbin stepped out onto the porch, eyes scanning the sky. "Get inside," he said calmly, but I could hear the urgency tucked behind the calm. I dropped the wood and ran, heart pounding. Thunder rolled. Again, deeper this time, and lightning danced across the horizon like the finger of God dragging across the mountains. The sound shook something loose in me, something I hadn't felt since I was a little girl crouched beneath a table, listening to my father break things when the bottle ran dry. I slammed the cabin door shut behind me and pressed my back against it, chest heaving. Corbin came in minutes later, soaked to the bone. He lit the lamp with shaking fingers and peeled off his coat. Then, without a word, he grabbed his blanket and laid it outside my bedroom door. "You don't have to," I said, voice thin. He didn't look up. "I know, but I will." I stood there, barefoot on the wooden floor, watching a man promise me safety without even raising his voice. I didn't say thank you. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because the words were too small. I fell asleep to the sound of thunder, but it didn't swallow me like it used to. Somewhere between the lightning and the silence, I felt something shift. At dawn, the smell of smoke pulled me from sleep. The barn. By the time I reached it, Corbin was already there, shirt soaked in sweat, throwing buckets of water onto the flames. The fire had caught the dry straw near the back wall, maybe from lightning, maybe from a stray lantern, but it was spreading fast. Without hesitation, I grabbed another bucket and joined him. We worked like mad things, coughing, shouting, stumbling, until the fire hissed and choked and finally died. He sat down on a log, soaked and blistered, wiping ash from his brow. I collapsed beside him, panting. "You could have told me to stay inside." "I could have," he said. "But I figured you'd come anyway." "You figured right." We sat in the ruin of what could have been disaster. Smoke curled upward like it was too tired to reach the sky. The barn was half burned but still standing. Like me, I supposed. He looked over at me then. Not like a man looks at a woman he's claimed, no. Like someone trying to see if the other person sees them back. And I did. Not everything, not yet. But enough to know this man had walked through storms of his own. "Thank you," I whispered. He didn't reply, just picked up a charred piece of wood and tossed it aside. But his silence said more than words ever could. The letter came wrapped, in twine, sealed with a worn stamp and marked with dust. Corbin found it in town, folded neatly between feed invoices and a flyer for a church revival. When he handed it to me, he didn't say anything, just looked at the paper like it might Bite. From back east, he muttered, then went outside to split firewood. I sat at the table and stared at it for a long time before opening it. The handwriting was tight and slanted, like someone used to writing bad news. Mr. McGraw, we regret to inform you that Lucille passed last winter. She was buried in the family plot next to the child. We understand you haven't returned to Boston in over 5 years, and the estate was settled in your absence. There is little left, but we thought you'd want to know. Frederick Wainwright, Esky Lucille. The name settled over me like snow, quiet, cold, and final. I didn't ask right away, just folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and set it down beside the biscuits I hadn't touched. That night, as we sat near the fire, him patching a saddle strap, me darning an old sock, I spoke. Was she your wife? He didn't look up, just gave a slow nod. And the child? He paused. Our son, Josiah. I waited, not out of politeness, but because some stories need space to breathe. She got sick, both of them did. Typhoid, he said, voice steady, like he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. I buried Josiah myself. Lucille, she left not long after. In spirit, I mean. Her body hung on, but not her heart. My hand stilled in my lap. That's why you left? He nodded. Boston wasn't home anymore, just a house full of echoes. I wanted to say something, but what words comfort a man who's outlived his own family? Instead, I whispered, I'm sorry. He finally looked at me then, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. That's why I didn't want you to feel like you were owned. I know what it's like to lose someone, not all at once, but in pieces. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You gave me more than I ever thought I'd have again. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. I didn't give it. You just hadn't been allowed to take it yet. We sat in silence, the kind that doesn't press or judge, the kind that says, I'll wait here with you. That night, I watched him sleep for a while, not in fear, not in doubt, but in quiet understanding. I hadn't come to the cabin looking for redemption. I hadn't come by choice at all. But somehow, in the ache of 2 broken pasts, something steady had begun to grow. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something that could survive a storm. Spring came slow that year, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Snow clung to the treetops longer than usual, and the earth stayed hard underfoot even after the sun returned. I had been at Corbin's cabin for almost 3 months when the stagecoach came rumbling through the hills. He was out mending fence posts when I saw the dust trail winding down the path, a signal of something foreign, something that didn't belong to this quiet life we'd built. A young man stepped down from the driver's seat and handed me an envelope. He tipped his hat politely, then rode on. The letter was for me. Clara Hensley, in a woman's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Clara, word reached me late, but I heard what your father did. I never stopped thinking about you, not even after I moved to Kansas with my uncle. We have a small home now, and I've saved enough to give you a place to start over. If you want to come, the coach will pass through Dry Creek again in 10 days. If you stay, I'll understand. Love, Ada. Ada, my childhood friend, my almost sister. She had braided my hair the morning Mama died and held my hand through every loss after that, until she was sent away to live with kin I never met. I read the letter twice, then tucked it beneath my apron. When Corbin returned that evening, I didn't say anything right away. I just watched him work, sleeves rolled up, hands calloused and honest. You ever think of leaving? I finally asked. He wiped sweat from his brow and leaned on the fence rail. I've thought of it, but I never found a place worth going. More than what I already had. And if you did, I reckon I'd leave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the edge of the woods and stood under the stars, that letter clutched in my pocket like it could answer my questions. There was a choice now. Stay in this half-repaired cabin with a man who'd never asked for anything but had given more than most. Or go to something clean, something new, with someone who remembered the version of me before everything fell apart. Both roads felt heavy. Both felt like freedom. The next morning, I sat at the table while Corbin stirred coffee. "I got a letter," I said, "from a friend in Kansas." He looked up slowly. "She's offered me a home, a fresh start." He nodded once, no surprise in his eyes, just quiet acceptance. "And?" he asked. "I don't know yet." He didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, "If you go, I'll ride you to the station myself, and if you stay, the garden still needs planting." I smiled, though my eyes stung. That night, I packed my things, not because I'd made a decision, but because sometimes folding a shirt helps you unfold your thoughts. 10 days. I had 10 days to decide whether to leave behind the first. Man who ever looked at me and didn't see something broken. The morning of the 10th day came cloaked in gold. The sky was soft, the way it gets before summer knows it's won. Birds called low from the trees, and the horses pawed the dirt like they could sense the weight of the day. My bag was packed. Nothing much. A few dresses, a locket, a worn copy of Little Women Ada once gave me. Corbin hitched the wagon while I stood on the porch watching. He didn't ask if I'd decided. He didn't press. He just said, "Stage leaves at noon. We'll get there early." I climbed in beside him, hands folded in my lap, the letter from Ada pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. The ride into town was quiet, not awkward, just full. Like both of us were trying not to spill something sacred. Dry Creek looked different this time. Maybe it was the way I sat straighter in the wagon seat. Maybe it was the way the townsfolk watched me, not like gossip but like curiosity. Or maybe they saw the same thing Corbin did, a woman who had come back from the edge and hadn't fallen. We waited by the station in silence, the horses shifting behind us. He cleared his throat, staring at the dirt. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. You never did." I turned toward him. "You gave me something no one ever has." "What's that?" "A choice." He nodded, still not looking at me. I could hear the stagecoach before I saw it, wheels grinding, hooves clattering, the sound of a new life arriving on schedule. Dust rose on the horizon. I looked at it. Then I looked at him. "You're not going to stop me, are you?" He finally looked at me then, really looked. "No," he said, "because that would be taking away the very thing I gave you." The coach pulled up, steam rising from the team. The driver jumped down and started loading luggage. I stepped forward, bag in hand. But I didn't climb aboard. Instead, I turned back and walked to him, slow and steady, until I stood just a breath away. "I thought I was coming here to be owned," I said softly. "Turns out, I came here to be free." He didn't smile, not exactly. Just the soft pull at the corner of his mouth, a sign I'd come to recognize as something close to joy. I looked back at the stagecoach, then down at my feet, then up at him again. "I'm not ready to leave," I said. "Not yet." "You sure?" "No," I admitted. "But I'd rather plant something here and see if it grows than start again somewhere I already know." He took my bag from my hand without another word and tossed it gently into the back of the wagon. The driver hollered, "You comin', miss?" I turned, shook my head. "Not today." He tipped his hat and climbed back aboard. The coach rumbled off, and with it, the last piece of the life I thought I had to chase. Corbin and I stood there a while longer, in the dust and the light, neither of us speaking. And then, just like that, we climbed back into the wagon, side by side, heading home. Where the garden waited, where something quiet and strong, and maybe even beautiful was beginning to bloom.